Hello everybody, my name is Daryl Bear. Welcome back to Maya Mondays, and today I'm talking about XGen a little bit more. I've had a couple questions come up in the chat window inside of YouTube about how to generate a field of grass, and I've had some other questions about when I do previews in XGen Maya's crashing. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on both of those, and we're going to start off by showing you the workflow for generating grass, and along the way we're going to be talking about expressions and the power of expressions with XGen, how that's really the key to working with the tool efficiently, and some tips and tricks for working with large data sets in Viewport 2.0. So what we've got here is we've got a library of grass that I downloaded from TurboSquid. This was done by Evermotion. They obviously make a lot of really great architectural stuff as well as some cool vegetation. And we've gotten 5 plants that we brought into Maya that we're going to be using as our archived objects that we're going to instance across our scene. It's worth mentioning that these objects are pretty high resolution. There are 250,000 faces, or a little over 250,000 faces for these 5 plants. So imagine if you had 10 of these guys, that's 2.5 million faces. If you have hundreds or thousands of these, quickly you're going to be having trillions or billions of faces. So renderers can handle that because they can load each one of these guys dynamically on the fly and fit it into the RAM footprint. Viewport 2.0 does a great job of this because it has the underlying Alembic technology that's driving it, but you need to be realistic about the machine that you're on. If you're on a laptop with 1 GB of texture memory, don't expect Viewport 2.0 to do a preview of a trillion faces. It's not going to be able to do it. So there's some tips and tricks that I can share with you to lessen the load that you see interactively, but still have the same load in the software renderer. And it's really pretty straightforward, but if you don't know where it is, you may not be able to find it. So I'll show that stuff to you, and I'll just share with you some best practices along the way. So as I mentioned before, these guys were saved out as archives. I did another YouTube recording. It was a sunflower demo for archive workflow. This builds up on top of that. So these guys were all set at the origin. They were poly reduced on the export process and ready to go. So let's go ahead and look at the scene that we want to begin instancing some grass on here. So this is an image-based lighting probe, and we're going to be using the texture information on the background for the background grass. But for this foreground area where this area is, I want to have real grass in here. I want that camera kind of setting down inside of that with some grass and some weeds and stuff like that. It's going to look pretty sweet. So we want to add a new XGen description to this piece of geometry. 3 ways of doing that inside of Maya. You can go to the XGen window, hit Create Description. You could click the Create Description icon on the XGen shelf, or you could just go Generate, XGen, Create Description. They all do the same thing. They bring up the XGen creation window where you define what type of primitive you want to do. So in this example, we want to do custom geometry or archives. We're going to randomly position those across the surface, and we're going to be using attributes based on expressions to control them. So we'll hit Create. As soon as we do that, we get a representation of those guys on that piece of geometry in the form of that little X. So the XGen description's on there, but we haven't loaded in any archives yet to begin seeing them in the viewport. Before I click the Add button on the archive files, I always go up to my density and I drop this down to a value of 0.05. And I talked about this in that other demo, the sunflower demo. The reason you do this, just to recap, is because XGen is very sensitive to the size of the object when you do the binding. So if you have it set incorrectly, XGen could try to load up 10,000 blades of grass and blow your system up and crash Maya. So it's just a good idea to set this density value low and then build yourself up. And I talk about it a bit more in detail in that other demo. And I'll try to put a link. There is an XGen playlist, but if you don't find the XGen playlist, I'll try to post a link here to that other demo because they kind of do go hand in hand. So with that set to a low value, we're going to go down to our archive files and we're going to add in that XGen archive of the grass. And we're just going to bring in one of the plants now and kind of build our way up here. Always a good idea to bring those shaders in, so we'll click yes. So as soon as we do that, you can see that we now have these blades of grass here, and they come in. And I talked about the fact that we had used the level of detail to do the poly reduction. So the next thing that we want to do to lessen the load in Viewport 2.0, as well as the renderer, is adjust our mid-max distance to our scene. So if I start to drop this mid distance down here, you can see as I swipe through that, see them getting a little bit darker and the polygon count lessening here. So these guys in the foreground now are 100%. Right around here, I want to kick into the ones that start to reduce. So I really only want, if they're really close to my camera, I want that full res, that full res geometry. But as soon as they get off the front of the camera, I'm going to reduce them 30%. And then the low distance is going to be reduced, I think 70 to 80% based on the archive here. So if I start to swipe this down, you can see right here, see that pop? That goes to the 70 or 80% reduced one. So we want that to kind of kick in right around his foot. So hopefully you're seeing that. Basically, we're full res right around this, a couple inches into the screen here. We go to the 30% reduction, and right around the dude here, we're going to the 70 to 80% reduction. So that lessens the load a fair bit. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to start to add some randomization to this. So we can change the size of each of these archives. You can scale them in X, Y, and Z, or length, width, and depth. Essentially, it's the same thing as X, Y, and Z. And these user interface elements are all being built with expressions. Everything in XGen is an expression. Loading a texture map, expression. Bringing the paint tool in, an expression. Making sliders, expressions. And these can all be tied together really simply. Creating user interface elements, all done with expressions. So what we want to do is we want to have random numbers drive our length, width, and depth, but we want it to be the same random number because we want these guys to scale uniformly. So what we're going to do is we're going to write an expression on this description that's kind of a global expression for that description that we can then reference back into those length, width, and depth sliders. So we're going to create a new float value, and we're going to give that new float value a name. It's going to be called scale. So we'll click the plus button on that guy. And now we want to write the expression, the attribute that's going to hold that. So we're going to say we want a custom attribute, $A, pretty straightforward, to hold a random number. So we'll just type rand and click down and hit the return key. And then when you hit the return key, it gives you the brackets automatically. So we'll say a random number between 0.1 and in this example, we'll say 1. And then we need to finish that line of expression with a semicolon and then just record, take the output of that and have it, there. So you just always end with that line 2 or the last line being, your attribute that you just made. So as soon as we hit accept, if we jump back into that expression, you can see, I got to put an equals to. $A is equal to rand. So we'll hit accept on that guy. We'll jump back in there and you can see we now have $A is equal to a random number between 1 and or 0.1 and 1, and it gives us a little preview of that. So if I change this to a value of 0.5 and hit accept and go back in there, you're going to see that it's slightly gray. Now, going in here and editing those expressions and jumping back and forth in and out of that isn't ideal. So what we want to do is we actually want to make some user interface elements that will live outside of the expression that I can use to set those min-max values that random number generator's picking from. And this is super simple to do inside of XGen. So all we have to do is make a new variable. So we'll say, I like to use $min, and I'll say that's equal to 0.1. And as soon as I hit the semicolon button, you can see that it built a new slider for me. Great. So now we're going to do another one for $max. So we'll say $max value is going to be equal to 1. And then again, I add that semicolon in there, and now we have those sliders. Now these sliders aren't hooked up to this random number range. It's not doing anything yet. So we just need to replace that with $min. And then we'll replace this one with $max. And now those values are driving the range that random number generator can pick from. So that's awesome. We love that. So we'll hit accept on that guy. So here's the thing that's kind of cool. I've now got sliders that let me adjust the min-max range of my random number generator. If I know I'm going to be doing something like this a lot, I might want to save that expression out. So you can just say, save expression as, and I'll call it random scale. So now if I wanted to have a new random number generator in my scene, I don't know, we'll just make a new one called DTO. I don't have to rewrite that expression. I can just quickly go down here and say load expression, random size, random scale. So now I've got this new expression that I could use to reference inside of anywhere in this description. So we don't need that guy, but I just wanted to kind of drive home the point that once you make these expressions and you build some user interface for some stuff that's kind of cool, save them, reuse them. Don't keep reinventing the wheel. So we've got our random number generator now that we can use to drive our length, width, and depth. So we'll jump into this guy and we're going to make $A instead of it being equal to, that slider, we're going to have it equal to scale and whatever scale outputs. And then again, you have to always end the expression line with a semicolon. So I'm going to copy this because I know I want to paste that guy into width also. And we want to also paste that into depth. So now, if we jump back into our expressions, you can see that we can randomly change the size of those instanced archives with our sliders. Really, really pretty straightforward. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to start to, let's get a nice view in here. We'll kind of do something looking down a little bit more, but still kind of resting into that grass. That looks pretty good. We want to start to randomize the rotation of these guys. So if we jump back into our around n here, I want to just make that not all be equal to the same value. We're going to have that equal to rand. So you hit the return key, it gives you the brackets automatically. So we'll say between 0 and 360. And you have to always end an expression line with the semicolon. So you set accept on that guy. So now we've got our random blades of grass, and that's really pretty cool. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to start to add in some more plants into our scene. So we're going to go ahead and say add. We're going to jump back into our documents, XGen, and archives. Now the order that I picked these is going to be the order that they go loaded up. So we want to grab the weeds, the crabgrass, the dandelion, and the dandelion pollen. We'll go ahead and we'll say add on those guys. Yes, of course we want to bring those in. And now if we just wait a second, you're going to see that we're going to get a nice little preview of our plants here. So at this point, I might want to stop doing an auto preview because it's going to get heavy. Now we got the bigger plants in here and things like that. Now my computer is pretty fast, but if you're on a lower end machine, you might want to say, let's turn off that auto preview so that it doesn't try to automatically preview as I'm moving stuff around or changing stuff. So we're just going to go ahead and reframe this up somewhere like that. That looks pretty good. And now that we've turned auto preview off, what I want to do is I want to start driving up my range here. So we'll go up to a value of 0.1. Since auto preview is turned off, as soon as I put 0.1 there, it tells me it's dirty with the exclamation point. So if I click my preview button, you can see we've now started to pump our density up here. So we're going to go up to we'll go to 0.25, refresh that guy, and in a few seconds there, you can see we start to get something that's looking pretty good. The problem is, maybe we'll go 0.4 in this guy. The problem is that it's actually got too many dandelions, right? Like it's all weed in all dandelion. So what we want to do is we want to change this to make it a little bit more biased toward the grass. So you can see that the index is randomly being picked by this expression. So it's randomly picking between 0 and the counter of how many archives we have. So 0 to 4. So it's figuring out how many archives we've made, and it's randomly going to pick between those. But if we want to make it a little bit more biased toward the grass, all we have to do is put a comma in here and then start setting values for our 5 different archives. So we're going to say we want mainly grass. So we're going to make it 80% grass by doing 0.8. Then we're going to do a comma and say we're going to make 10% weeds. And then we're going to do a comma and we're going to say make 10% or 5% crabgrass. So we're going to say 0.05. And then we're going to make it comma 2.5% dandelion. And then comma 0.025 or the equivalent of 2.5% for the dandelion with the pollen. So, this adds up to a value of 1. Pretty straightforward. So we hit accept, we hit preview, and just in a few seconds now, you can see that we have far fewer dandelions. We've got some weeds, we've got some grass in there. I might turn off my preview of that guy and just kind of do something like that. Let's just re-preview that one more time and get a little bit higher there. Now I want to have more grass actually. This is still a little thin here. So we're going to go, 0.6 on that guy. Let's preview that. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I'm a little low now. I'm going to turn off that preview and get a little bit higher and a little bit more over here. So I start to think of, Viewport 2.0 at this point, it's almost like a renderer, right? Like I kind of move stuff around and then I do a render. And that's because, we're flooding trillions of polygons. So I could probably tumble this on my computer, but on a lower end machine, maybe you couldn't. So let's say we want to have more yellow dandelions here. Well, this is really simple. All you have to do is say, instead of saying 80% grass, we're going to get 70% grass. And then we're going to change our dandelion, which is our fourth one in, to 1.25. We hit our preview. And now in a few seconds here, we've got, I got to hit return on that guy. We've now got a lot more dandelions in there. So it's really pretty straightforward to start working with this. The last thing that I want to bring your attention to is on the preview tab, you can make sure that primitives only in view are turned on. So if you had geometry that extended way far out, this is on by default, but just make sure that's on so that you're not trying to load XGen archives in areas outside of the camera frustrum. And the other thing that you can do is you can drop this percentage down. So this is just for the preview. So if I hit render, it's gonna render everything that we're seeing currently. But if my computer can't load this much stuff into Viewport 2.0 or do that sort of, think of Viewport 2.0 as a renderer. If it can't do the real-time render into Viewport 2.0 because I don't have the hardware to support it, I can make that be a value of 20, right? And hit my preview, and then now you see I'm only getting 20% of actually what would render, right? So you can use this to adjust and kind of, fine tune it to parse down the amount of information that you're trying to load into the limited RAM footprint that your video card's going to have. Now, again, since I've got, Quadro K 5200, I can preview everything in my scene. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys find this useful. If you do, please subscribe. I take questions. Sometimes I get around to making actual demos around them. Like this one, someone asked, how do I do a grassy field? So I tried to address that. And then obviously someone asked about, how do I get previews? Well, lessen the load your machine is trying to do if it's crashing. That's my advice. So thank you again. Please subscribe. Cheers, everyone.